as sessions go, usually it's a lot of introduction and getting familiar with the topic first. So I'll just get started. Thank you all for coming, by the way. Hope you guys are enjoying SharePoint Saturday. My name is Eric Wozakowski. I'm a professional software developer working for Casino, Arizona in Scottsdale right now, and I'm also an independent contractor, so I get to see both sides of the world. We're going to be discussing connecting a SharePoint list to a SQL table for CRUD to create, read, update, and delete. We're going to be talking about the overall architecture of creating this connection between SharePoint and SQL. We're going to discuss creating a secure store application, a target application. We're going to understand the security between SharePoint and the target database, how they're similar, how they're different, and why we're needing to set it up that way. We're going to then create an external content type. We're going to modify the business data connectivity model that is created as a result of creating the external content type, and then ultimately have a SharePoint list using that content type connect to the SQL database so that you can update, modify, and delete. Apologize, I think I'm going to be fighting with my VPN this session. And this is, as you can see, because I had the VPN open, very heavy demos. This is actually a 2-hour seminar that I've put together. We obviously don't have 2 hours. We only have about 40 minutes, 45 minutes, and then I'll leave it open for questions. So I'll be able to take questions after the presentation, but it's very heavy demos. The slide deck will be available after the presentation. I'll have a link posted where you can download it. Very large slide deck, lots of step-by-step demonstrations throughout with screenshots of how to do exactly what we're about to do with demonstrations. So should be nice and straightforward. If you guys have any questions, of course, you can email me or contact me. So a little more about me really quick. I started programming in 1982 on IBM 3090 and 3088 mainframes. Back in the days of punch cards, very reel-to-reel tape mounts, when modems were the phones that you held the hold button down till your thumb turned purple, and when it connected, you could let go. Yeah.
Hey, where's all the gray hair?
Yeah, well, I hide it really well. It's starting to come in. I started working with SharePoint in 2007. The organization had WSS 2.0, and they were using it very heavily for project management and IT, and they wanted to do more with it. So I started learning more about SharePoint, got certified, and took them all the way now to SharePoint 2013. So it's literally been a step-by-step gradual upgrade and road process for them. I'm currently MCTS certified in both 2007 and SharePoint 2010 for application development. As I said, I work for Casino, Arizona, and I'm also an independent contractor. And if you're social, there's my Twitter tag. Typically, my Twitter posts are very bland and straightforward and links to articles I found. So you've been warned. So why are we doing this? Well, the first thing we can think of is this gives users an ability to manage database content using a SharePoint list. Pretty straightforward. That's the topic of what we're going to talk about. Apologize. Okay. This solution works both in SharePoint 2010 and 2013. That's what I really like about this, because there were a lot of things that changed in SharePoint 2013, but they left this alone. And this is something that I've done time and again in my organization and externally. It's been a tremendous help, and I'm so glad that I'm able to do this in SharePoint 2013, and I'm assuming going forward. You have the ability to control list access using multiple security models, because we're going to use SharePoint groups, you can use SharePoint users, you can use Active Directory authentication, you can use Active Directory groups. If you have Kerberos enabled on your farm, you can pass that through as well. I mean, there's a lot of options. The same options you would have available in any other SharePoint solution you have doing it this way, connecting these two systems. It's going to provide a central place for users to access and modify their data. I hear this time and again from organizations, CIOs and CTOs, I want one truth. Well, this gives you that one truth. Now you have everything kept in your collaboration or your ECM platform, but you have your users hitting that platform to modify external data that you normally either wouldn't give them access to the database in the first place, or they need to have access. You can't give them access because they're not in IT, yet they have to be able to modify the data, and you don't want to have to do it. This gives them that opportunity, which brings me to my final point. It removes the burden of managing end users' data and puts it back on them, which is where it should be. If it's a collaboration platform and we want them to collaborate with their data, this gives them the opportunity to do so. So Some examples, like we just discussed. You have website administrators who want to modify configuration data stored in a database, but they can't have access to the production data or the content. I've seen, I don't know how many blog posts and forum postings and complaints saying, my organization wants me to modify the web config file and I have no access to the web config file. Well, I got an idea. How about storing the web config file in a database and then using the, I'm just going to go back and connect to it later so it shuts up. How about storing that information in a database and then having the web application extract that information from the database when it populates, and then have your end users modifying the database content with a SharePoint list. It's being done at Casino Arizona right now with their BI. Another example, users need to be able to edit BI properties stored in a SQL table. This is what I was just describing. Their BI solution has all of the SSIS package configurations kept in a database. And the one field that has a connection string in it is editable by a SharePoint list. So now, whenever network decides to pick up something and move it and stick it over here and call it SQL2, you just go into the SharePoint list, change the name, BI works. No one had to touch it. IT didn't get involved. A lot easier. You may decide you want to give certain users the ability to view data in a convenient way without giving them database access. You might just decide that this list or this database table, you really want your users to be able to modify the data, but you know darn well they don't belong in a position where they have access to the data themselves. You don't want to give them SSMS, you don't want to give them a query tool, but you can still give them access to the database by doing it through SharePoint list, and we'll explain that.
So you're basically establishing a credentials layer between various
We're impersonating.
databases. Right. Okay.
We're impersonating. We're going to take a target application, and we'll do this in the demo. We're going to take a target application, we're going to give it the credential that the database is expecting,
Right.
and then we're going to put users from AD and SharePoint into this target application ID, and then pass that through to the database, and the database is going to say, you're fine. So there's a couple things we need to do mentally and architecturally to prepare for this type of solution. The first thing is, where is this list going to live? I'm pretty confident that many organizations running SharePoint have their sites broken down by department, by organizational unit, etc. So let's assume that you have that in your infrastructure, and you have a payroll and a finance and a marketing and a R&D and an IT, etc. If this is a list that's going to be controlled by a compliance unit, probably going to want to put the list in the compliance site, or possibly in the audit site, or something like that. Have in mind where you're going to put this, because when we get into SharePoint Designer, you're going to have to remote into that site to establish the list. The next thing is the SQL Server database name and account connecting to the database. Now let me take a step back real quick and explain. The demonstration uses SQL. You can connect to any external data source, platform, Oracle, DB2, doesn't matter. As long as you have the ability to connect, as we're describing here, you can do it. But for the sake of the demo and this session, we're going to be using SQL. We need to make sure the account has appropriate permissions. In this case, I just created a local SQL service account. I just called it Service Demo App, for example. And I gave it DDO rights. That way I know for sure it can create, read, update, and delete. Obviously, if your organization, you want to create a read-only list to a read-only data source, you could create a service account with data reader on the SQL box, and then when you connect your list to it, give it read-only access, as I'll demonstrate, and then you should be fine. It should be read straight on through. That'd be a great way to secure it. The next thing is, which fields from the SQL table are you going to expose to the list? Now in this case, I'm going to be using the good old Northwind database, and I'm going to expose fields out of the employees table. But this should give you some idea of when I pull that up and I show you how to select certain fields, what to name them, how to select their properties, you'll get an idea of, oh, I can do this with this table, etc. You just need to have in mind what kind of things are we going to make available in SharePoint to our end users when we're making this connection. And ultimately, which users in your organization are going to need to view or modify this data. You should already have an idea of what this is going to be when you're first constructing this. But this would be a good thing to have put aside so that you know for certain when you're setting this up, you're not having to go out and say, you know, do you need access, do you need access? You already either have an AD group established, a SharePoint group established, or you have in mind who's going to need access, the marketing team, the R&D team, etc. So here's where the demos start. We're going to break this up into 4 separate sections. The first section is going to create the secure store application. Then we're going to create an external content type. Then we're going to set object permissions on the BDC object that's created from the external content type. Then we're going to hook the list up to it. The Secure Store application demo is the longest. It takes the most time to put together. The next most longest is the external content type, because that's where we decide what fields are set up, what kind of connection we're going to have, etc. And we'll demonstrate that. The last two are very quick, but I'm not going to race through them. I'm going to give you all time to take a look at it. But this is where starts the demo portion of the slides. In case this didn't work out, my VPN didn't work out. Like I said, the slide deck was over 40 slides long with step-by-step screenshots and demos on how to do everything. So if you need to later on, if you want to download the slide deck and have it with you, by all means, it'll be available. Let's start the demo process. So I'm going to see if it'll let me back in. Just a second. I apologize for the delay.
Really, you're not being dry at all so far.
I tend to get dry. I don't know how 2 water bottles ended up here.
Find an ASU one?
Just regular ASU?
Yeah.
Oh, you got credentials?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. You promise not to look at your password? Thank you so much. Now we've set up our VPN at the casino with extremely tight constraints, obviously for governmental and security reasons, but also to avoid idle sessions, and they literally have a 3-minute timeout. So every 3 minutes I was having to hit that, and I apologize. Okay, the first thing we're going to need to do is navigate to Central Admin. First thing I do is go into Central Administration, and in this case, I'm working off my development environment. Yeah, you can see it good. And under Application Management, we're going to go to Manage Service Applications. Click that. And again, I'm working off of SharePoint 2010, but the flow of what we're discussing is exactly the same in SharePoint 2013. The look is a little different because I changed the themes. But the location of all of these links, the location of all the objects, everything is exactly identical. The screenshots in the slide deck, some of them I also put screenshots of SharePoint 2013 in there as well, just for familiarity. Okay, down at the bottom, under the Secure Store Service, we're going to click Secure Store Service. And you can see I already have one in there. Performance Point was created when we did our BI dev environment. So first thing we're going to do is create a new target application under Manage Target Applications. Now when you click this, you may get prompted with, you need to generate a new key. If you do get prompted with this, just follow the prompt straight on through. It's going to have you create a secure store key, which basically is just where all the credentials are kept. It's encrypted. You don't have to remember it. I mean, it wouldn't hurt to write down the key, but you're never going to be prompted for it again. And if you want, you can refresh the key and type in a new hash code. Totally up to you. I've already done this numerous times, so it's not going to ask me to do it again. The first thing I'm going to do is create a target application ID. The target application ID, it says, needs to be a unique identifier. But the nice thing is it can be anything you like. It doesn't have to be a GUID. It doesn't have to be an integer. It can be a friendly name. It can be a sequence of special characters. Doesn't matter. SharePoint doesn't care. The caveat to this is it has to be, you can't change it once you create it. So you have to have something that you know either by your naming convention or how you normally identify unique identifiers. You might want to be consistent about that or think about it before you just go ahead and type anything in. For the sake of this, I'm just going to call it my demo app. But it can be anything you like. And you can, spaces are also acceptable. The display name is, like any other case, it's just a friendly name. Your contact email address, this should be the person who is responsible for this target application. And then the target application type. As you can see, there's numerous different types of contracts we can set up. For the sake of this demo, I'm going to choose group, but basically it's broken up into individual or group. In the slide deck, I've defined each one of these and what it means and provided references back to Microsoft's documentation on what they mean and why you would do that. Basically, individual means you're going to give access to one person, not a group, just one body. Group would give you the option to add multiple people, multiple groups, etc. The most common one I've seen is group. That's why we're sticking with group. But again, definitions are provided in the slide deck. You can refer back to those for more details. And then the next thing I'm going to do is, come on now, click next. This screen is providing the credential fields that are going to be prompted when we're setting up the secure store impersonation, as I was explaining before. So when I have that service account that I created on the SQL box, and I know that's what I'm going to tell this target application to impersonate as, this is the field that's going to be prompted. What's interesting to me is this looks to me initially like, oh wow, I need to decide what data type it needs to be and how it needs to look. No, this is literally a cosmetic prompt. And it's telling you, how do you want it to look? And to prove that, I'm going to take out the word Windows here, and I'm going to say SQL. And the same thing with Windows password, SQL password, because I remember, and I may forget, that I created a SQL service account on that box. So don't pass in a domain / username. Don't pass in an account name. I want a SQL account. So that'll tell me later on as an administrator, oh, this is a SQL account. I remember that. Now, field types, we should try to be consistent with what this is. Obviously, we have a choice of generic username, password. You can choose a PIN if you need, if it's a 4-digit PIN you want to pass in, if that's your target data source's style. A key, Windows username and password. You can also, in SharePoint 2013, you should take a look at this, you can pass in certificates. You can pass in a certificate and a certificate password. Really cool. I'm not going to go over that today, but if you have 2013 in your environment, go check that out. It's pretty neat. One other thing while I'm setting this up that I want to mention is some target data sources require more fields. A good example is CRM. CRM is also going to require a locale, a language, like a farm, ID, and I can't remember the name they use in CRM. We have CRM, and I don't administer it. But basically, like a universe ID, Metastore? Anyway, you're going to have to add additional fields in here. To do that, you just click Add Field, and follow the same process we just did. Custom name, data type. After that, we click Next. Target application administrators are people typically at a network level, SharePoint farm admin level, people who are going to be managing this connection, access to the connection, access to the central admin, people who have that level of access, they should be in this list. But note the warning, users who already have full control or all target applications privileges will automatically have it even if you don't put them in there. I'm one of those people, I'm the farm admin, so I don't have to put my name in here. I'm going to do it for the demo, but just keep that in mind that these are typically going to be people who wouldn't normally have access to, but should be administering it. They might be your network admins, they could be you, but keep that in mind that you don't have to put yourself in there. You do need to put at least one person in there. Members, I want to talk about this for just a minute because it's not as obvious as I thought when I first read this. It says users and groups map to the credentials defined for the target app. When we think of members here, we need to be thinking of two separate populations of people. This is not the people who are going to have access to the list directly. This is also not the people who are going to be only allowed to view and modify the data in the database. You should think of this list of members as a large population that you will be selecting from. later on when we grant access to the list that's going to be modifying the database. So in this case, as scary as it seems, I'm going to type in all authenticated users. And somewhere I can hear my CIO's hair tinge on end, because I'm granting everybody and their mother access to this target application ID. But I want to, because later on, I want to pick the marketing vice president, the research and development director, and the security manager. And I want to put them in that group to view this list of emergency alerts that came out last month. Something to think a little outside the box with. This is the population I want to choose from. Later on, I'll show you how we're going to add those people to that list. So from that point, I'm going to click OK. And we're done. Now the target application has been created. The next thing we need to do is set permissions on it. Setting permissions on this means what account is going to be impersonated when it talks to the database. So there's two ways you can do this. We can mouse click the context menu and choose set credentials. Or up at the top, you can check the box, and up at the top, click set credentials over on the up here. In this case, I'm just going to click set credentials. And notice the prompt. SQL username, SQL password. It's just a cosmetic prompt. But you decide what it's going to say. I mean, you could literally type in anything. Domain username. It's totally up to you. In this case, I've got my credentials already set up. So I'm going to put that in and hit OK. And the target application ID has been created. So that covers the secure store application and setting permissions on that object. The next thing we need to do is create an external content type. And with that, it will take us to the next set of the demo. Now for this, you need SharePoint Designer. So you'll want to open up SharePoint Designer, same process in 2010, 2013. Connect to your target site or web that you're going to be dumping a list on. Whatever you're going to create this list on, whatever subsite, that's why we need to think of it ahead of time. So in this case, I'm using my development site in my development environment. And once there, you're going to click External Content Types. And up in the ribbon, up at the top left, we're going to click under New External Content Type. And from here, you can give it a name. In this case, I'll call it the demo app. And this will automatically populate. Then we're going to come down here to External System and click here to discover external data sources and blah, blah, blah. We're going to click that, and we'll get to add a new connection. So I'll click Add New Connection. The data source in this instance is SQL Server. Notice there's other options, but in this case, I'm going to choose SQL Server. The database server name that we already thought about ahead of time, we're going to type in here. The database name we want to connect to, if I can spell it right, is Northwind. The name is optional. Again, friendly name. For the sake of moving along, I'm not going to bother with a friendly name. And then we're going to choose Connect with Impersonated Custom Identity. And in this case, I called it My Demo App, I believe. Make sure. Yep, I called it My Demo App. So in here, you can see I've been playing with this before. I'm going to type My Demo App. There's Northwind. Because I gave that service underscore demo app account DBO rights to the Northwind database on that data server. So now all we got to do is open up Northwind. And I'm going to find the employees table. Locate whichever table you need to locate. Right click and look at all the operations we have to choose from. And we can literally choose only read list, read item, update only. Each of these has their own definition in the slide deck. For the sake of the demo, we're going to choose create all operations. But just to demonstrate, just to show you, there's a lot of options available when you're doing this. We're going to do create all operations. That's going to give us create, read item, update, delete, and read list all in one shot. So next thing we do is click next. And here's all the fields from the employees table. This is where you get to decide which fields you want to expose to the SharePoint list once it's created. In this case, well, first of all, like any list or like any database, there has to be a unique identifier. The unique identifier is the primary key. This is no exception. We have to have a primary key that SharePoint can identify, otherwise how is it going to know what fields to update in the database? So we're going to leave the employee ID alone as the primary key, and we're going to leave map to identifier selected, and of course read-only. But the rest of these fields basically are cosmetic. Which ones do we want the users to see? So I'm going to leave last name, first name, title alone, and I'll expose hire date and home phone. Okay. And now on each one of these, you go ahead and on the property side, you can change the display name to be oh shoot. Let me go back and fix that. To be however you want the no, let's go back here. However you want the field to be displayed, how you want it to show. So like on here, I want it to say last name with spaces, first name with spaces. Hire date. And then home phone I'll leave alone. Hire date. This time I'm not going to hit the enter key. And we'll put spaces here for last name, first name, because that's how they're going to show in the list, and I want it to be pretty. Hire date. And I'll leave home phone alone so we can see for sure how it works. On each one of these, let's say one other cool feature I want to bring up. Let's say, for example, the last name field or the name field was actually like a common name out of Active Directory or a complete name out of Active Directory. You could go down to Show in Picker and check that. And when you go open up the list to edit the item, it will actually be a people picker control. Also, you can choose different Office properties, map them to different Office properties in case, for Link or Communicator, whichever one you're using, or Yammer or whatever. It'll pick up the presence, and it'll show their presence right in the list. It's kind of slick. But for this case, I'm just going to leave those alone. Again, you can set these fields as required or not. We can also take the hire date and set it to read only if we want to, because I don't want people messing with other people's hire dates. That's static. But you can change your name because you might get married or might have a lifestyle change. So we're gonna leave those as editable. And I'm going to click Finish. Well, before I do that, there is one more step. If for some reason the employees table had 1.5 zillion records, and you know what happens to SharePoint when you get over 3,000 items in a list. You can set a filter here to only pull back so many records, records between a certain date, etc. You can set a condition. I'm not going to in this case. So I'm going to hit Finish, and then hit Save. And that's going to create the external content type. And notice, it's being saved to the Business Data Connectivity Metadata Store. That's the next place we're going to need to go. So we've created the external content type. The next step is to set object permissions. Now, when I say object permissions, we're going to be setting the permissions on that VDC item that we just created in the list. So to do that, let's go to the demo. So now back here, we're going to go back to central administration. Application management, this time we're going to choose service applications, but we're going to choose the business data connectivity service. And if you notice, one's been created for us, demo app. And it even tells us the namespace or the location that we stored the content type, wherever we're going to have our list. So here, just like the other one, we can choose set permissions here, or you can check the box and choose Set Object Permissions. Both do the same thing. This is where you decide from that original population of people who's going to have access to this application. That's why it was important initially when I said you need to make sure we're grabbing everybody possible that may someday want access to it, which could be, in this case, all authenticated users. It could be everyone in Active Directory. That's fine, because we're going to decide specifically who has access here. If they're not listed in this screen, they will not have access to the list, even if you're the farm admin. You will not be able to get to this list. That's how serious SharePoint takes the security between itself and the database. So we have to specifically add, it's my report writer, we can specifically add individuals here to this list, and it will populate. This can also be, you know, if you pull this up, the people picker, you can choose from Active Directory, you can choose all users. I mean, it operates the same as any other people picker style control, where you can validate names, you can read from Active Directory, you can read SharePoint groups, anybody's allowed, as long as they're from that original population. We also need to decide what kind of permissions each of these people is going to have. So here's where setting up an Active Directory group initially, dropping people in that Active Directory group, and then putting the group in here might be beneficial, because otherwise you're going to be setting individual permissions for a lot of people. So in this case, I'm going to give myself everything, but I only want him to be able to view the list. So I'm going to say execute and selectable in clients. So that way, no matter where he is, he can pull up the list and he can view the contents of the list, but he can't do anything with it. I don't want him editing. And then I hit OK. And that was the demo for setting permissions. That's how easy that was. Final step, we're going to create the linked list. Let's go to the demo. This one will go by so fast if you blink you miss it. We're going to go back to SharePoint Designer, remote into our site. You're going to go to external content types, locate your external content type, and we can do this one of two ways. You can right click on the list name and choose external list, or you can leave it selected and choose external list from the ribbon. In this case, I'm just going to click here. We need to give it a name. So the demo app list, description, if your organization does descriptions, and hit OK. And we're done. Once the little wheel of death stops, I'll show you the development site. Almost done. There we go. So now, here's the site I was just on. I'm going to click lists. And wait for JIT to kick in. Come on. While we're waiting, normally this kind of delay doesn't happen when you're creating an external content type. There's no reason for IIS to reset, for JIT to compile. It just runs. My development environment is just that. It's a development environment, so things tend to crawl. There's my list, the demo app list. Notice how it shows the item, or the type is external, no items. I'm going to click the list, and when it opens, there's Northwind. Exactly the way I wanted it. I wanted just the last name, first name, title, hire date, and home phone. And notice home phone is run together, but the rest didn't have spaces. Exactly the way we wanted it. Now, let's edit Nancy's contact info. Notice no hire date, because we told it, read only. We don't want to mess with hire dates. So let's change her phone number. Let's say she changed her name to Nancy Martinez, so she got married. And her new phone number ends with 1234. Hit save. There it is. Nancy Martinez, home phone 1234. Now, just to prove that I'm not bluffing, I've got SSMS open, and I'm connected to Northwind. I'm Search SQL 8. I'm connected to Northwind, and I'm going to run just a select. And there's Nancy Martinez. Your home phone, 1234. told, have access to it.
Can you add a workflow to that so that it gets approval before it goes in?
I'm sorry, say it again?
Can you add a workflow to that last piece so it can be approved before it actually goes back into SQL?
Yes. What you can do is you would have to create a list event receiver on the list that you've got in the external list. You'd have to create a list event receiver using Visual Studio and do it on the item updating event. And that should, now I haven't tried this, I'm thinking off the top of my feet here, but you should be able to create an item updating event, and in that event receiver, stop the process and require, and launch a workflow or require a task to be approved, and then once approved, have the database be updated. It sounds like that would be the best course of action. I would do it in an event receiver, though, on the list. Good question. So, oh, yeah, go ahead.
Well, can that list be, I haven't worked yet with the external content types, but can that list then be manipulated like any other SharePoint list? Can I reference it from other lists? Can
Oh, yeah. You can create a web part. Yep, create a
okay.
web part, point to it, absolutely. One application that we're using at the casino with this external list is the marketing and the hotel have an application they use that gives them competitive rates based on other hotels in the market in the area. So this application, basically you put in someone's information and it gives them a rate based on competitors' rates and their time that they stay and play and how many times they've come by, and this formula, this algorithm compiles this number for them. I don't even know how it works, but I know that's what it does. The problem is the marketing director and the VP and the hotel management can't see the options for this application. They won't expose the options for it. They just tell you it works. So they don't know what type of matrices or levels are available and how to set them and parameterize them. So when they contacted the vendor said, well, it's all kept in the database. Just call IT, and whenever you want to change, they'll change it for you. Sorry, we've got 45 projects to finish in this fiscal year. No. Tell you what we're going to do, though. I'll create a list. I'll point it to that database table. You can manage your parameters, because I'll block out the primary key, I'll block out the foreign key, and I'll just expose the minimum and maximum value ranges that you want. You can set them however you want. You want to create a new one? Create a new list. Create a new, not a list, create a new row, create a new item. Delete items. Just leave at least one in there. They love it. I haven't heard from them since. We did this, I think 6-7 months ago. Haven't heard from them since.
Do you use this with your financial people also?
Yes. Yes. They use it, I mean, our finance is very heavy BI. They use SharePoint BI. If you haven't been in any of the BI sessions, you've seen some of the cool stuff they do. That's what we're doing in our infrastructure. So they use a lot of BI. But when it comes to SharePoint lists, they use them for reading. So they want to see data in other tables, other applications, other environments, but they don't want to touch it. They just want to see it so they can do their audits, they can pull up their totals, their sums, and just like any other list, you can group, you can sort, you can put calculated columns in. It's a SharePoint list.
And this connection is not going to interrupt any other connections that might be pointing to the SQL side database, correct?
Correct. It's optimistic concurrency. So you have the ability to make changes here, and other applications, other websites will see it.
Well, we tend to use SQL databases as tertiary databases to interconnect our platforms.
Okay. Okay. And you could. I mean, because SQL is going to put a write lock on that object, unless you're doing a note lock to just read information back, it's going to put a write lock on there when it's updating anyway. So when it sees the message from SharePoint, it already has the write lock on the database. No one else is going to modify it. So yeah, absolutely you can. Good questions. Okay, so to review, we've created a secure store application. That was where we selected the large population of people that we could choose from. The security between SharePoint and the target database, remember, we're basically impersonating. So we're going to have the target impersonator be the impersonator. We're going to give them the credentials that the database is expecting. And then we're going to take the new population of people, and we're going to put them in the external content type and add them to the secure store application, the target application, and that gets passed through to the database. The database says, who are you? I'm your service account. Okay, come on in. And SharePoint manages the security from there. We've created an external content type, which is what SharePoint uses to connect those two data sources together, itself and its external data source. The business data connectivity model created an item for us when we created our external content type. That's what allowed us to add users to that group or to that target application. And ultimately, the SharePoint list just consumes the business data connection that the external content type created. Any questions? Yes?
Can you add arbitrary columns to the list? Say if you want the username of the person updating a row, and you want that username to be in the database, so you know who updated it?
Good question. I attempted to do almost something just like that the other day. I created an external list to a table, and then I went to that list in SharePoint and said, I want to create a new column. You can't do that. But can you create, this is a on-the-fly demo, can you create an additional column, and I don't believe you can, in this list, just a SharePoint column? And I believe the answer is no. If I go into this list,
Like a calculated column?
right, and I go in here, it's not going to let you create a column. But you still have the same view operations that you normally would have. Unfortunately, I'm running IE 10 on the machine that I'm remoted into, and SharePoint 2010 is not compatible.
Well,
Give me a second. Yeah, I'm going to change.
but because you could run a workflow, you could have a reporting list elsewhere that keeps track of
Yes.
the information that you're after.
But you'd have to go in and customize the workflow because workflows are only kept, the metadata regarding the workflow is only kept for a specific amount of time.
Well, but if you're doing it on a modified, if your
Mhm.
workflow's running on a modified, you just want to capture who's modifying that document. That goes into
Yeah.
the reporting list. We do that all the time because, auditing services are great, but only IT central admin has access to it. So our records admins need to be able to audit some things themselves. So every time we do a transaction through a workflow, we can write them onto a separate list that they can then maintain and track.
So I'm going to create a new view, sort it by last name.
So if you can't add a column and you can't do a unique view for this, would the option then be to go back to your SQL data and create additional fields for that information so that you know the last time it was changed, the date, the time, you've got a timestamp, and then the user, either their LAN ID or whatever, the AD name for them? Would that be the...
That would be, I would suggest, if you're going to do the same event receiver route, I would suggest something like that. Something that just, while you're waiting for that approval, once that approval comes in, now you're going to do an item updated. That's where you would go back and say, okay, in the event properties, the event receiver properties, get the ID from the list, which will be like the
And
employee
send it
ID
back.
5 or 7 or whatever they are here, and go update the table where this ID exists and date and time stamp it, grab the current username out of your event properties or your workflow properties and populate that. Yeah, that would be cool. That would be very cool. Good questions. Anything else? Any other questions? I talked a little fast, so we have some time. I apologize.
Just
That's
thinking of all
it?
the different ways to use it.
This opens up a lot of options. Once I started,
yeah.
I did this about a year ago, and I documented it right away, and I wrote a blog article on it. And I thought, man, there's so much you can do with this. And then the business started coming to me with, we need you to, I can do that with this. And I can just let users modify their own web config files. And I can let you modify your own table. And did you want to see the survey results? I can put that in a list too. Now everything's contained in SharePoint because our CIO thinks that the world revolves around SharePoint.
But it does.
And it does. I, for one, welcome our
At least
new
my world
SharePoint overlords. Yeah. And he has his one truth. And I have all of these departments interconnected with each other in their remote tables, DB2 and SQL, in my organization, looking at SharePoint data, what they believe to be SharePoint data.
Yeah, see, we've got all of our documents and all of our engineering stuff happening on SharePoint, and we just released a GIS system whose back end is SQL. So I've been thinking, because we've been establishing these editing matrices on who's going to be responsible for editing what data, and now we can just, you know, as long as we can control the access at the cell level, you know, in SQL, then we can expose this data and let the editors have access to it right through SharePoint.
And what you can do in that same scenario, you could create, either have an Active Directory group or a SQL account, one that's a data reader and one that's a DBO.
Oh, exactly, yep.
And then
Yeah.
give your data readers, give those to your auditors, your compliance,
Yep.
your limited access people, and then give your DBO people, put them in that group and give them more access. And then your business data connectivity model permissions, that third step we did, then you just drop the people in the right section. And
Well, and the fact that you can put this in a web part too means, because each of these individuals will have their own personal pages where they can, you know, pull in all of their tasks, pull in their documents that they're working with, but then we can give them a web part for maintaining this particular segment of the data on the GIS side as well, and they'll just have it right there in their own little world.
And web parts have audience targeting.
Right.
So you can even hide those web parts from others. Yes?
You talked about you mentioned quickly the filtering in the external content type. I had trouble trying to set that up. And I did it on the initial screen, not that second screen that you showed.
Let's take a
Do you
look
have
at
a
that.
sec to go back to that?
We've got some time. Yeah, let me go back over there and give that a try. So I need to go back to SharePoint Designer.
Because I had a database that was huge. I wanted to filter it to the current year or something like that, and it didn't seem to matter where I tried to do it, I wasn't able to.
Let's go. Let's do it on list. Yeah, you're going to make me do it this way. Okay. So we'll add a filter parameter, and this time I'm going to add, let's call it, what am I doing? Employee ID less than, or greater than 2, I'll say. I'll just call it greater than 2. And I'm going to say where I would do a comparison type where the employee ID is greater than, let's see, ignore if the field of the value is, let's say greater than 2. Let's give that a shot. No, what doesn't it like? Yeah, I haven't played with filter properly, so I want to try it and see how it works. Let's get rid of that. That's fine.
I seem to always get an error or warning down at the bottom. I wasn't able to apply any kind of a filter.
Go back in, and after you hit OK, go into the operator and hit the number you want to have done. And
Oh, in here, yeah.
yeah,
It's grayed out. I wonder why. It's not letting me-
because that should populate. If you have a web part for it, it should populate in the web part
Yeah.
for you to add the new whatever it is, whether it's text or numeric into it.
The field is employee ID.
So you're saying, yeah, employee ID is greater than
And
parameter,
the parameter.
but it's not letting you pick the parameter.
But it's going to want me to do a user, put that in. It's going to want me to put that in. So let's see. Save it. And then I'll go back to my list. It's not gonna let me change the parameter from here. Oh, you know where? I bet you. That's fine, yeah. It's not going to be have to experiment with that and see if I can get you a clear answer, because it's, and also my dev environment is very clunky. I've done a lot of things to it that I shouldn't have and stuff that I was supposed to, and I'm gonna have to play with it now to let you know. Before we go, let me get your email address so I can get you that information. That's a good question. I usually don't have to filter them, but I can see where it would be applicable if it will make a lot of information.
Yeah, well, years and years, I just wanted to look at the current year and just couldn't see me make it happen.
Oh, especially HR sites like payroll have 7 million records. You know, okay, well, I only need the first 1,000.
Will this link to a view in SQL?
You can
Yeah, I was able to do it.
to a view in SQL. Yeah, you should
Yeah,
be able
because
to.
that means he could get his.
You
data.
could filter the data in the view first.
view
Absolutely. But yeah, it'll work. You can connect to views. You can connect to tables.
Oh wow.
Good questions. Good stuff. Anything else? Any other questions? Any other ideas? Any other suggestions? Well, I appreciate you coming to my session. Thank you so much. I got resources up here you can choose from. I tried to shorten the links the best I can because my last name's a little long. So I have a URL shortener. But you can follow me on my blog. My blog is typically only professional, so I only post articles of things I've either discovered or found or did. And 99% of that is in SharePoint. Slide deck is available here. If you need to take a jot down the URL, go for it. But remember, the slide deck is 39, 40 slides long, and it includes step-by-step with screenshots in 2010 and 2013 of how to do everything we talked about today. And the slide deck also, in the third bullet point, the blog article is one that I wrote some time ago, but it's the same thing, literally, step-by-step with screenshots on how to do this. I did it mainly so I would never forget how I did it, because it can be complicated. Now that I've done it so much, I wanted to share it. So, thank you again for coming. I appreciate it. I hope you enjoy the rest of SharePoint Saturday.
Thank you.
Cool.